Welcome to Get Schooled on Concussions. I'm Dr. Karen McAvoy, one of the co-founders, and as one educator to another, I'm here to teach you everything you need to know in close to 15 minutes on returning a student with concussion back to your classroom. So, are you ready? Let's get schooled on concussions. As a teacher, you probably started hearing about concussions about 20 years ago when it came to our attention that young athletes were sustaining concussions in various sports. We started to become aware of a phenomenon called second impact syndrome, where a young athlete takes a hit to the head followed by a second hit. The second hit can lead to brain damage or even death. Unfortunately, this was happening to young athletes all over the country. This newspaper clipping shows an incident of second impact syndrome at a high school in Colorado, where I happened to be the school psychologist at the time. All 50 states and the District of Columbia moved swiftly to pass return-to-play legislation requiring removal from play for young athletes of a certain age if there is a suspicion of concussion and returning to play only under medical clearance. But what we didn't consider until more recently is that every student athlete is a student first. So while it is important to remove all students with a concussion from PE, physical play at recess, school-sponsored sports, and recreational sports, in the meantime, we as educators must also do everything we can to provide a soft landing for them to return to learn, even if they don't return to play. Let's start with the definition of concussion. A concussion is a complex pathophysiological cascade of events that happens on a cellular level with the cells in the brain. It's not a structural problem, meaning you wouldn't see it on a CAT scan or an MRI, but you do see the functional problems as a result. Any hit to the head or jolt of the body that causes the brain to shake in the skull can result in a concussion. And the functional problems that you see with a concussion are these signs and symptoms, which fall into 4 different categories: physical symptoms, cognitive symptoms, emotional symptoms, and sleep and energy symptoms. The good news is that we don't expect a concussion to be a long-term injury. We expect 70% of students with a concussion to get better within 28 days. We don't expect students with a concussion to be out of school for very long. They may miss a few days, maybe a week, and we don't expect students to have long-term grade or credit consequences if we all jump in and support these students right away. So if 70% of students with a concussion get better within 28 days, where does concussion management really need to happen? Yes, in your general education classroom. Fortunately, concussions are not a 504 problem or an IEP problem. Good concussion management requires that we are quick and flexible and that we put some academic adjustments in place in the general ed classroom so that we can support these students for the first 1 to 4 weeks of their concussion. Does this sound familiar to you? That's because we as educators already have an existing educational framework in place that supports all students who struggle at school, whether that be with reading disorders, behavioral, or medical conditions. Your school probably already has an MTSS, multi-tier system of support, or RTI, response to intervention system in place. That means that we focus most of our supports in general education to prevent longer-term or more complicated problems. Widening our Tier 1 supports helps all kids who struggle at school, regardless the reason. Concussion fits within this system. Get Schooled on Concussions has taken the medical science of concussion and turned it into language that fits for us as educators. When you have a student with a concussion return to your classroom, we want you to focus on only these 3 things in this order: mental fatigue, slow processing speed, and short-term memory. That's because mental fatigue is all about symptom management. If a student cannot manage their symptoms, they will not be able to be at school to hear your instruction. And if they are not at school hearing your instruction, you will have a harder time figuring out if you can give them the gift of removal of non-essential work and reduction of semi-essential work. And finally, with short-term memory problems, how will you hold them accountable for mastery and grades? So when you have a student with a concussion come back into your classroom, First, just offer them a soft place to land because they may have symptoms for up to 1 month, and we don't want them to be out of school for a month. Focus on symptom management first because workload management and adjustments for tests and grades cannot follow if the student is not first comfortably back at school. But don't worry, you actually already adjust for students who feel lousy at school, maybe from chemotherapy or diabetes. You already adjust work requirements for students who work slower and cannot complete all work, maybe from ADHD. And you already adjust for students who need to show mastery in different ways, maybe from a learning disability. Concussion does not have to be a scary medical condition for us educators. What you already do for your students for mental fatigue, slowed processing speed, and short-term memory due to other conditions works beautifully for students with concussion. Having a concussion is an energy crisis. That means that when you run on empty, you will flare symptoms. It's like being an iPhone 6 instead of an iPhone 12, or being a car with a small gas tank. When students are running on empty, they begin to get symptoms. And if they're not feeling well enough to attend school, they don't hear your instruction. We want them back at school, managing their symptoms well enough so that they don't miss your instruction. Here are a few mental fatigue strategies that you can use and you can offer your students to help them keep their symptoms at bay. The first one we call pacing. After a certain amount of mental exertion, students might need to close their eyes or put their head down on the desk for 5 or 10 minutes in the classroom simply to refuel. Some students might need to take a strategic rest break. The idea behind a strategic rest break is that it is a proactive 15 to 20 minute rest, maybe in the school clinic or in the counselor's office, one time in the morning, one time in the afternoon, simply to refuel. Once a student with a concussion has heard your instruction, you can then help to figure out how much work they should be responsible for. But keep in mind, they do have slow processing speed, so we do recommend a removal of non-essential work, a reduction of semi-essential work, and clear expectations around a reasonable amount of essential work. We also know that extensions and postponement of work tend to make students with concussion very anxious because the work piles up and they're not able to complete all of it. In your training, you probably learned about the second principle of personalizing learning by Dr. Leslie Wilson. The second principle divides knowledge into the must-knows, the need-to-knows, and the nice-to-knows. When a student misses school or instruction for any reason, moves in mid-year, or is having a difficult time, you as a teacher already intuitively focus your instruction on must-knows, not on nice-to-knows. That automatically cuts down the amount of work a student has to learn, practice, retain, and show mastery of. With a concussion, just like with many other learning, behavioral, and medical conditions, focus on must-knows primarily, because maximizing supports for the first 4 weeks of a concussion can really help to prevent longer-term problems. Here are a few more ideas for differentiated instruction for workload management. Focus on comprehension instead of memorization, on quality instead of quantity, allow for more group work, and you can allow your students to have some supplements, such as audiobooks, teacher notes, colored paper, and ways that they can reduce noise and light sensitivity. One of the most common supports that teachers give to students with a concussion is to extend deadlines and postpone work and to put zeros in the gradebook as place markers. While this seems like a great intervention, it actually leads to falling grades and heightened anxiety in the student and their parents. We suggest that you give adjusted work and grade it fairly, because much of the missed work will not be able to be made up due to slow processing speed. Exempt need-to-knows and nice-to-knows for a short time. Keep the gradebook populated with adjusted must-knows and grades up during recovery. Finally, after a student has heard your instruction and has done some of the work that you would like them to practice on, you can now hold them accountable for grades and mastery. Here are some ideas on alternative appraisals and fair testing. Consider alternative and creative ways to check for mastery, such as oral and video presentations, collages, and group work. But if you feel that a test is necessary, consider a few adjustments, such as open book, multiple choice, extended time, and no more than one test per day. It is quite common to hold back quizzes and tests from a student with a concussion for weeks 1 to 2, but it is perfectly acceptable to ease them back into tests and quizzes at about week 3 and 4 as they can tolerate it. This is a copy of our symptom wheel. This simply aligns academic supports with various symptoms that the student may report to you. Feel free to circle through this as many times as you need to support the student in as many different ways as possible. And while many doctors like to prescribe absolutes such as don't let a student with a concussion read or look at a computer or do in-class work or homework or take a test or quiz, it is simply not feasible for a student to be at school and not to do any of those things. Remember, guidance from healthcare providers about academic supports are suggestions, not mandates. The materials you will receive at the end of this training will end up covering more realistically and more relevantly a myriad of academic suggestions. And your skill as a teacher allows you to be an expert in return to learn more than any healthcare provider could ever be. So it is perfectly acceptable for you to allow students with concussion in your classroom to read or look at a computer in small amounts as long as they are taking more frequent mental fatigue breaks. It is also all right for you to allow them to do some reasonable amount of in-class work and homework as long as you are bringing down the amount. And quizzes and tests may be held back for the first few weeks, but it's okay to start to add those in as weeks go on. While there is medical clearance to return to sports, PE, play at recess, there is no medical approval needed for you to apply or lift academic adjustments as you see fit in your own classroom. Be as generous as you can with your academic supports in the first week or so of a concussion, but slowly, gently begin to pull back every week and test out their ability to tolerate more academic expectations with less and less symptoms as time goes on. Now that I have explained to you the most important parts about Return to Learn, Get Schooled on Concussions is going to take you through a process by which you will be able to fill up your toolkit with emails and tip sheets to the effect. After this training, you will be directed to go to your Rhode Island Educator landing page. On your state landing page, you will have access to tip sheets and videos that you can download at your convenience. You will also have access to the Teacher Acute Concussion Tool that we call the TACT. The Teacher Training TACT is an electronic survey that takes less than 5 minutes to complete. You will answer 6 questions about how and what you teach and how much technology and reading you use in your lessons. Remember the 3 common effects of concussion in the classroom: mental fatigue, slow processing speed, and short-term memory? The TACT will deliver information on these 3 areas into your email inbox. Your TACT email will be color-coded and will align with mental fatigue, slowed processing speed, and short-term memory, or in other words, symptom management, workload management, and mastery and grades. The TACT includes interventions that are presented in the correct order, and tip sheets are attached as well. You will automatically receive emails at weeks 2, 3, and 4, which will reinforce your continued support of the student, but will encourage you to continue to fade back academic adjustments with time. Today, right after this video, you will complete the Teacher Training TACT so that you will receive 4 weeks worth of emails and tip sheets and fill up your Return to Learn toolkit. But more importantly, we hope that your school will use the TACT in real time, meaning that later in the school year, when an actual student with an actual concussion is ready to return to your classroom, you will be notified to take the TACT again, and based upon not only your teaching style, but also the time of the day that you teach that particular student and the time of the grading period, you will receive even more customized guidance. Real-time application of the TACT allows you to apply all that you have learned on Return to Learn to an actual student with a concussion who needs you to know how to support them. Okay, Now that you know everything you need to know about Return to Learn, are you ready to do the TACT together and fill up your Return to Learn toolkit? Great, let's do it. On your computer or phone, enter the specific Rhode Island link given to you by the facilitator of this training. That will take you to this Welcome Rhode Island Educators Password page. Enter the password given to you at this training. That takes you to this landing page where you will click on Access TACT. At that point, simply follow the directions. Complete the demographic information. Use only your school or work email address. If this is your first time in the TACT, answer yes and answer the 2 pre-TACT questions. And since you are doing the TACT today for training purposes, simply click on Training. Remember, there are only 6 questions in the teacher training TACT, so this will take you less than 5 minutes to complete. And then hit Submit, and within minutes you will have your customized email in your inbox. You will continue to receive emails for the next 3 weeks. If for some reason you do not receive your initial email, talk to the Return to Learn facilitator at your school or whoever brought you this training. At 4 weeks, your Return to Learn toolkit will be complete. And later in the year, when you have a student with a concussion that comes back into your classroom, you may be asked to do that TACT again so that you can get real-time guidance. For the integrity of your Get Schooled on Concussions subscription and for your data, please do not share your school or state-specific link or password outside of your school or state. We thank you for getting Schooled on Concussions today, and we thank you for everything that you do for students every single day.